Caitlin Clark is facing brutal backlash for simply showing support to an injured competitor. Clark's well-meaning social media post about JuJu Watkins has unleashed an absolute firestorm, with critics dissecting her word choice and questioning her motives. The absurdity of this situation reveals the toxic underbelly of what should be a supportive sports community. Nobody could have predicted that a simple message of encouragement would trigger such vicious attacks, but here we are, witnessing the hatred that follows Clark's every move. Of course, last night during March Madness against Mississippi State, JuJu Watkins suffered a horrific injury. Did a video on it this morning. Obviously, we're all pulling for her. All right, to get better. I haven't seen any Caitlin Clark fans talking negatively about JuJu Watkins and that injury or wishing it on her or anything like that. I wish I could say the same for fans of the original WNBA fans when it comes to you-know-who, Caitlin Clark. And in fact, I think one of them made a live stream about Caitlin's knee or something like that. It let us break down this utterly ridiculous situation that's unfolding right before our eyes. Last night during March Madness, USC star JuJu Watkins suffered a horrific injury during their game against Mississippi State. It was a devastating moment that should have united basketball fans in support of a talented young athlete facing adversity, and initially that seemed to be happening. Caitlin Clark, being the class act she consistently proves herself to be, posted a heartfelt message on her social media. Her words were simple and supportive, sending all my thoughts and prayers to JuJu. Kid will come back stronger than ever. She included a red heart emoji. That's it. A straightforward message of encouragement and support during a difficult time for a fellow basketball player. In any rational world, this would be seen as exactly what it is, a kind gesture from one athlete to another. But we're not living in a rational world when it comes to anything related to Caitlin Clark. Instead, this innocent message has become yet another weapon for her critics to wield against her. The absolute insanity began almost immediately. Clark's post has been viewed by over 1.2 million people, and while many responses were positive, the hateful comments started flooding in, focusing on one specific word, kid. Yes, you heard that correctly. These critics are furiously objecting to Clark referring to Watkins as kid in her supportive message, not the heartfelt wishes for recovery, not the prediction that Watkins will return stronger. No, they're fixated on the word kid as if Clark had committed some grievous offense. One particularly unhinged commenter wrote, "Kid? Why are you calling her a kid? You're only 3 years apart." Another chimed in with, "You're not a 20-year veteran, check yourself." The absurdity reached new heights with someone claiming, as a person of color referring to someone as kid is usually done by an elder generations older or said by someone in your generation but in a belittling way. Any reason to try to bring this young lady down? I guess they're jealous. I don't know what it is. Well, yeah, I do. All right. Yeah, for a lot of them, it's her skin color and her sexual preference. I hate to say that. That is part of this. Let that sink in for a moment. Clark offers support to an injured player, and somehow this gets twisted into accusations of disrespect, condescension, and even racial undertones. It's beyond comprehension. These people are actively searching for reasons to be offended, manufacturing controversy where none exists. What's particularly telling is how quickly some commenters injected race into this non-issue. One person explicitly stated, "I think JuJu will have a problem with you calling her kid," without any evidence whatsoever that Watkins took offense. They're creating imaginary conflicts and putting words in Watkins' mouth to fuel their own agenda. The timing of these attacks makes them even more despicable. Watkins is dealing with a serious injury, and instead of focusing on her recovery, these so-called fans are using the situation to launch yet another attack on Clark. It's exploitative and shows a complete lack of respect for Watkins herself. Let's be crystal clear about something. The word kid is commonly used in sports as a term of endearment, not disrespect. It's used by coaches, teammates, and competitors across ages, races, and sports. There's nothing inherently condescending about it, especially in this context. Clark wasn't lecturing Watkins or talking down to her. She was offering encouragement during a difficult time. What's happening here is a perfect example of what Clark has been dealing with since entering the national spotlight. Every word, every gesture, every expression is scrutinized and often deliberately misinterpreted by people who seem determined to tear her down. The mental gymnastics required to turn a supportive message into an offense is truly Olympic level. And let's address the elephant in the room. Some of this hatred is clearly motivated by factors that have nothing to do with basketball. As one commenter pointed out in the transcript, for some critics, it's about Clark's skin color and sexual preference. While that's a blunt assessment, there's truth to it. Clark represents something that makes certain segments of the existing WNBA fanbase uncomfortable, and they're looking for any excuse to vilify her. This pattern of behavior isn't new. From the moment Clark began breaking records and drawing unprecedented attention to women's basketball, there's been a vocal minority that seems personally offended by her success. The same people who claim to support women's sports and advocate for greater recognition are often the first to attack the woman who's bringing more eyes to the game than ever before. What's particularly ironic is that if the roles were reversed, if Watkins had referred to Clark as kid in a supportive message, it's virtually guaranteed that none of these critics would have batted an eye. Their outrage is selective and transparently motivated by their pre-existing dislike of Clark. The double standard is impossible to ignore. Clark is held to an impossibly high standard where even her most benign supportive statements are twisted into something sinister. Meanwhile, actual instances of unsportsmanlike conduct directed at her are often dismissed or even celebrated. Remember when Clark was physically targeted during games last season? The cheap shots, the unnecessary roughness that went beyond competitive basketball. Many of the same people now offended by the word kid were either silent about that treatment or actively defended it as part of the game. The hypocrisy is staggering. What makes this situation even more frustrating is that it distracts from what should be the focus: Watkins' injury and recovery. Instead of uniting in support of a talented athlete facing adversity, these critics are hijacking the narrative to fuel their anti-Clark agenda. It's disrespectful not just to Clark but to Watkins as well. It's worth noting that there's been no indication whatsoever that Watkins herself took any offense to Clark's message. These critics aren't defending Watkins, they're using her injury as ammunition in their ongoing campaign against Clark. That's not advocacy, it's exploitation. This toxic behavior creates a no-win situation for Clark. If she hadn't said anything about Watkins' injury, these same critics would likely have attacked her for being insensitive or indifferent. When she does offer support, they pick apart her words looking for any possible offense. She can't win with a certain segment of the basketball community that seems determined to vilify her regardless of her actions. The level of scrutiny Clark faces is unprecedented. Every word she speaks, every post she makes, every expression that crosses her face is analyzed and often deliberately misinterpreted. Can you imagine the mental toll of knowing that even your most positive statements will be twisted into weapons against you? It's a burden no athlete should have to bear. What's happening to Clark isn't just unfair to her, it's damaging to women's basketball as a whole. The WNBA is experiencing unprecedented growth, with record viewership and attendance largely driven by the excitement surrounding Clark. Yet instead of embracing this moment, some established fans and players seem resentful of the new attention and are actively creating a hostile environment. Think about the message this sends to young fans just discovering women's basketball through Clark. They tune in excited about this new star they've heard about, only to witness the vicious attacks and manufactured controversies surrounding her. How many potential lifelong fans are being turned away by this toxic atmosphere? The upcoming WNBA season should be a celebration of incredible talent, including both Clark and Watkins when she recovers. Instead, there's a cloud hanging over what should be an exciting time for the sport, created by people who claim to be its biggest supporters, but are poisoning the well with their relentless negativity. Let's talk about what's really happening here. This isn't about the word kid. It's not about Clark being disrespectful. It's about a segment of fans who feel threatened by Clark's popularity and are looking for any excuse to tear her down. They're gatekeeping, plain and simple, trying to preserve what they see as their lead from this outsider who's bringing in new fans they don't approve of. The irony, of course, is that these self-appointed guardians of women's basketball are doing far more damage to the sport than Clark ever could. Their toxic behavior creates an unwelcoming environment that drives away potential new fans and tarnishes the league's image. They're sabotaging the very thing they claim to protect. What kind of message does this send to athletes considering a career in the WNBA? You'll be celebrated unless you become too popular, at which point you'll be subjected to relentless attacks and have your every word scrutinized for potential offense. That's not exactly an enticing prospect for top talent considering the professional options. The silence from the league itself on this issue is becoming increasingly problematic. By not addressing the toxic atmosphere surrounding their biggest new star, the WNBA risks appearing complicit in it. They're allowing a vocal minority to define the conversation around the league at a time when they should be focusing on the incredible opportunity Clark's popularity presents. This pattern of attacks isn't just happening on social media. There are YouTube channels and podcasts dedicated almost exclusively to criticizing Clark, analyzing her every move and statement for potential flaws. It's become an industry unto itself, feeding off the negativity and stoking the flames of division within the basketball community. What makes this situation even more absurd is that Clark and Watkins could potentially form one of the great rivalries in women's basketball, driving interest and viewership for years to come. Instead of celebrating this possibility, these critics are trying to manufacture conflict between them based on nothing but their own twisted interpretations. The sad reality is that this kind of treatment isn't new for groundbreaking female athletes. From Billie Jean King to Serena Williams, women who change the game and bring unprecedented attention to their sports often face similar backlash. There's a pattern of established fans and competitors resenting the newcomer who disrupts the status quo, even when that disruption is overwhelmingly positive for the sport as a whole. Let's be absolutely clear, Caitlin Clark has been nothing but respectful toward her fellow players, including JuJu Watkins. She's consistently demonstrated good sportsmanship, grace under pressure, and a genuine love for the game. The narrative being pushed by her critics bears no resemblance to reality. It's a fabrication designed to justify their predetermined dislike. As the WNBA season approaches, this situation serves as a troubling preview of what Clark will likely face. The physical targeting she experienced in college will almost certainly continue at the professional level, possibly with even greater intensity, and if the reaction to her supportive message is any indication, the off-court attacks will be just as relentless. What's particularly troubling is how these attacks might affect Clark's natural expressiveness on the court. Her passion for the game is part of what makes her such a compelling player to watch. If she feels that every reaction, every celebration, every word will be scrutinized and weaponized against her, she might begin to suppress that natural enthusiasm. That would be a loss not just for her, but for the game itself. It's worth considering what the end goal is for these critics. What exactly do they want from Clark? She's brought unprecedented attention to women's basketball, conducted herself with grace off the court, and extended support to fellow players including Watkins. Short of disappearing entirely, it's difficult to see what she could do that would satisfy her detractors. The reality is that nothing will satisfy them because their issue isn't with anything Clark has actually done, it's with who she is and what she represents. She's broken records, drawn massive crowds, and changed the conversation around women's basketball. For people who are comfortable with the status quo, that's threatening regardless of how she conducts herself. As fans of basketball, men's or women's, we should be celebrating both Clark and Watkins. They represent the bright future of the sport. Talented young women who play with skill, passion, and their own unique styles. Their parallel journeys could help propel women's basketball to new heights of popularity and recognition. Instead, a vocal minority is trying to create division where none needs to exist. The manufactured controversy over Clark's use of the word kid is so transparently ridiculous that it would be laughable if it weren't so indicative of the larger problem. When people are this determined to find offense, there's literally nothing Clark could say that wouldn't be twisted and weaponized. She could post the most carefully worded, thoroughly vetted statement imaginable, and these same critics would find some way to attack her for it. What's happening to Clark isn't criticism, it's harassment. It's a coordinated campaign to tear down a young woman who's achieved remarkable success through hard work, dedication, and genuine talent. And it's happening right before our eyes, in real time, with a shocking lack of intervention from those with the power to address it. As the regular season approaches, there needs to be serious consideration of how to address this toxic atmosphere before it further damages the league's image and potential growth. The WNBA has a golden opportunity with Clark's arrival to reach new heights of popularity and recognition. That opportunity could be squandered if the current environment is allowed to persist or worsen. The irony in all of this is that by attacking Clark for her supportive message to Watkins, these critics are revealing far more about themselves than they are about her. Their willingness to twist a gesture of kindness into something sinister speaks volumes about their own motivations and character, and increasingly basketball fans are seeing through it. There's a growing backlash to the backlash, with more people recognizing and calling out the unfair treatment Clark receives. This gives some hope that eventually, the positive voices in the community will drown out the negative ones. But that process could be accelerated if those with platforms and influence in the world of women's basketball would take a stand against this behavior. As we move closer to Clark's professional debut, the basketball community faces a choice. We can allow a vocal minority to poison the well and potentially drive away new fans, or we can reject their toxicity and embrace the exciting future Clark, Watkins, and their contemporaries represent for the sport. The choice seems obvious, but making it a reality will require active effort from everyone who cares about the growth and health of women's basketball.